Hello YouTube! My name is Scott and welcome to another episode of Opinions No One Cares About, a video series that hasn't driven me insane quite yet. What? I haven't done a longer video like this for a while because I spent the last few years on a project where I would watch an episode of Star Trek and then summarize it for a YouTube short. I did this for every episode across all 12 series and the short treks, which is kind of like putting a hat on a hat because they're short enough anyway, but whatever. It took the better part of 3 years. I'm actually not done because 2 series haven't fully wrapped yet, but it has been a long road getting from there to here. And that incredibly subtle reference brings me to the topic of this video, Star Trek Enterprise, the OG Trek prequel. Set about a century before TOS, Enterprise was the first Earth ship capable of Warp 5, mostly in theory, but whatever. And captained by Jonathan Archer, not time-leaping Dr. Sam Beckett, as you may have guessed, because they look identical.
I don't see it.
Shut up, Boyms. Archer and the crew of the Enterprise went out into the galaxy, meeting the neighbors, having fun adventures, sometimes not so fun, doing a surprising amount of time travel, basically living it up in a galaxy without the Federation, or the Prime Directive, or shields for their ship even. It's that far back. But I hear you saying, what could you have to say about Enterprise that hasn't been said already, dude? It's been off the air for over 20 years. Well, I was inspired by my rewatch of the series and my friend Dustin Wing over at the channel of the same name. Great guy, hosted the Buffer Time livestream I'm proud to be a part of, and one of only 2 people I know who can beat me at Star Trek trivia. Love you, Josh. Dustin has a series of ongoing alternate Trek history videos, where he speculates about what would happen to the larger Trek universe if something changed, link below. And they're good, kind of like if Marvel's What If did Star Trek, if such a thing were possible. I mean, it's not like Paramount or Disney could just buy up another major network. Now, Dustin goes pretty in-depth in his videos, and I will too, because an early episode of Enterprise got me thinking, then writing, then talking to you. So let's take a look, shall we? In the Andorian incident, Captain Archer, whom I'll be calling Johnny from here on out, checks out a Vulcan star chart and realizes they have an outpost on a planet not too far away. His Vulcan exo and science officer, T'Pol, is like, yeah, that's a monastery. You wouldn't even be allowed to talk there. There's no point in going. But Johnny doesn't listen, and off they go. And it's a good thing they did, because this place is crawling with Andorians? Commander Shran of the Imperial Guard, who, by the way, looks really familiar for some reason, is convinced that this monastery is hiding a secret listening post that Vulcan is using to spy on Andoria. And as it turns out, he's right. Vulcan spies? Sounds crazy, right? But let me sum up the rest. The secret outpost is found, Shran decides he owes Johnny now, and Enterprise goes off for more adventures, and the rest of the series happens. Which is great in some cases, and in others, not. Seriously? That's how you decided to end things? At this point, I want to discuss the relationship between Earth and Vulcan. According to canon, Earth makes first contact with Vulcan on April 5th, 2063, or possibly sometime in the 70s, or maybe it was the 50s. Regardless, first contact day could be a day I very well live to see and complain about on future social media. I'm joking. Most of us nowadays won't live to the age of 80. We're not rich enough. Sorry, I'll try to tone down the social commentary. Vulcan worked with the humans to develop their deep space program, like, very closely. They actually kept us from going into space before we were ready. What, by Vulcan standards? Their amount of influence and control is a point of contention in this series that, honestly, I agree with. Especially since we should be past the point where we just want to move fast and break things. Sorry, I did it again. But also, at this point in history, Vulcans are kind of dicks. Arrogant, condescending, controlling. T'Pol is only first officer of the Enterprise because they insisted and wouldn't let them go into space otherwise. The hell? This, of course, led to some immediate friction between her and some other crew members, specifically Trip Tucker, the chief engineer, leading to 4 seasons of will they, won't they, including multiple times where they massaged each other. Spoiler, they will they'd. And Johnny, it wasn't the same. I mean, there was friction, but it eventually went away. Which leads to the question I should have asked before now. What if Johnny had listened to T'Pol and Enterprise never went to P'Jem? A question I'm going to answer eventually, but start by looking at it with regards to Shran. He kept coming back during the series because you can't keep a good Jeffrey Combs down, and after P'Jem, he felt he owed Johnny a favor. So, assuming Johnny listened to T'Pol and they didn't go, what happens? In the short term, nothing really. Shran found the listening post anyway, the Vulcans get a black eye, he takes a victory lap. Nothing really changes. But, as time progresses, The Andorians, and maybe Shran too, I don't know, blew up the monastery on Pajem, and since Vulcan apparently doesn't have a word for accountability, they're blaming Enterprise and T'Pol specifically for it. I cannot stress enough how dickish they are. They're ready to transfer her off the ship, but Johnny wants to hang out with her on Coridan first. Unfortunately, they get captured first and held prisoner because, as it turns out, Coridan hates Vulcans. Vulcan Captain Sopek shows up to take T'Pol, but winds up helping to rescue her, along with the Enterprise crew and, more surprisingly, Shran, who showed up because he owes a debt to Johnny, even if, as he says, Vulcan is prepping for war with Andoria. And T'Pol takes a shot in slow motion for Sopek, some lies are told. Basically, she gets to stay on Enterprise. But in this alternate timeline with no debt to Johnny, Shran isn't involved in this one. The monastery still gets destroyed, but Enterprise and T'Pol rightly aren't blamed, and Johnny and T'Pol still get captured, but that's because Johnny wanted to go to Coridan anyway. And the rescue? Pretty much the same, but with no Andorian assistance. Still, not the biggest ripple in the time pool. But what happens next? Well, I'm assuming things stay the same until the next season and the episode Ceasefire. Vulcan and Andoria are duking it out over a planet they both lay claim to when the Vulcans sue for peace. Shran doesn't trust them, quite rightly, but he does trust Johnny and only wants to talk to him about it. So Johnny and T'Pol go down and find Shran and his supposedly non-hostages. And through a series of events involving Ambassador Soval, who unsurprisingly is a dick, Shran getting undermined by his subordinate Tara, hi Susie, and Trip parking Enterprise between two warring fleets in space, everyone finally calms down enough to negotiate and have a drink about it. But alternate timeline. With no debt owed to Johnny and none owed to him because they don't know each other, Shran doesn't get Enterprise involved, and this little dispute escalates into full-blown war. A war that Enterprise gets pulled into on the Vulcan side, of course. This negates most of the rest of Season 2 because they'll be too busy doing war stuff and complaining about it, probably a lot from Trip, to find a Temu TARDIS, or get possessed by Will-o'-the-Wisps, or get Johnny busted by the Klingons. And of course, Travis isn't going to go see his family, and Trip won't make a stand on gender issues. All well and good, but this season also gives us the episode Regeneration, and that gives me pause. Some Borg left over from First Contact. That's the movie, mind you, not one of the many episodes with kind of the same name. They're thought out in a research base at the Arctic Circle, and wouldn't you know it, they'd like to rejoin the collective, please. But wouldn't you know it, they run into some people along the way and assimilate them, and then Phlox is almost assimilated before everything is fixed. In this timeline, Enterprise is who knows where doing war stuff instead of close enough to stop the Borg. And you know what? I'm okay with it. Because there's that whole plot hole where Phlox cured assimilation centuries before the Borg became a threat, and it never comes up again. So I'm calling this one a wash. Same with the Temporal Cold War. This is an intentionally alternate timeline. Nothing changes along those lines, and not just because it makes things easier for me. But at the end of the season, the Xindi attack still happens, because the Sphere Builders aren't going to care about some war when they're trying to move into our dimension. So Earth gets blasted, and Johnny and the crew take off for revenge. But aided by the Vulcans this time, who don't want to go into the Delphic Expanse themselves, but you never know if the Andorians have some bases in there. Some Vulcan, probably Captain Sopek, takes the role that Shran originally took because he was helpful, and Season 3 will probably have a lot more space battles since the Andorians are in the Expanse. In fact, I'm going to take a broad overview here and say that much of the season is the same, with some minor changes brought about by the Vulcan presence. Episodes like Extinction and Rygene will be changed thanks to their help in curing viruses and catching spies. Impulse is most likely to affect Sopek as well as T'Pol. Northstar probably still happens despite Vulcans wanting to focus on the war effort. Twilight and Similitude will affect Johnny and Trip the same, although Hatchery is going to be drastically shortened. Carpenter Street goes untouched because it's a temporal Cold War thing, and E-Squared is a no-go because the Vulcans will stop Enterprise from running into the unstable wormhole that caused it. Sorry, Lorian. The rest of the season continues unabated, the Xindi are partly allied with and partly destroyed, and Earth is saved! But then comes Season 4, and this one's the kicker. The first 2 episodes about time travel and Nazis in America, a thing we know could never happen, are unchanged. But then comes the next episode, Home. As you may recall, this was when the Enterprise crew returned home as heroes, and quite rightly. But there's also an undercurrent of xenophobia thanks to the Xindi. And that xenophobia is undoubtedly going to be heightened after the Vulcans dragged the one Earthship into their war. I have no doubt that even more people will be questioning why the Vulcans have such a huge influence over our space program, especially when there are more ships being built. But on the plus side, since Enterprise didn't go to Pajem, T'Pol didn't get blamed for it, and they didn't go after her mom when they couldn't get to her. So she goes home to visit, but doesn't have to marry what's-his-name. Small win. Glossing over the next few episodes about Eric Soong and his augment children, hi Brent, we get to a very significant three-parter. The Earth Embassy on Vulcan gets bombed, and the blame falls on a group of Vulcan pacifists, which should have been the first sign that something was shady about it. But T'Pol's mom is one of them, so she and Johnny go down and find them, well, get captured by them, in a place on Vulcan called the Forge. But hey, there's TOS reference to Pow. 3 episodes and some other stuff later, Johnny ends up holding the Katra of Surak, the greatest Vulcan ever, and finds his Kirshara, a notebook of sorts that winds up becoming like the Vulcan Bible, paving the way for the entire species to be governed by pure logic. This is essentially the birth of the Vulcan race as we know it, and because we made one tiny change a couple years ago, it never happens. That bombing was orchestrated by Vulcan High Council leader Valas in order to drum up support for going to war with Andoria, because don't forget we're doing 9/11 parallels. But we're already at war with Andoria now. So Admiral Forrester lives, but the Sirenites don't go to the Forge, Johnny never becomes OP, and the Kirshara is never found. So the Vulcans don't become the Vulcans we know and love, but more on that later. And with the war going on and Enterprise not being able to get back to Earth, Emery Erickson's son is trapped in transporter limbo forever. And Observer Effect probably happens to other people. And the next 3-parter? Total bust. This one involved Johnny trying to broker peace between Andoria and Tellar Prime, while dealing with some pesky Romulans and the ship they had that used holograms to look like other ships. It had Johnny and Shran going to Andoria, the introduction of the Aenar, even hinted at the founding of the Federation. A Federation that won't be a thing, as we know it anyway. With Vulcan and Andoria already fighting, and no relationship between Johnny and Shran, he's not there to broker peace, and Tellar Prime probably joins them against Andoria. So who do the Andorians turn to? They might overlook the Romulans' use of a kidnapped Aenar, especially since Romulans are so good at impersonating Vulcans. And to be fair, Shran wasn't sure the Aenar even existed. So if the Federation becomes a thing at all, it's founded by Earth, Vulcan, and Tellar Prime, period. And they're up against a coalition of Andoria, Romulus, and maybe the Orions, who are becoming a force and might find it easier to influence them than Johnny was in that one episode. 2 giant warring factions fighting to control the galaxy, and Hemmer never becomes an engineer, which is a small but very important point. The only plus side I can think of is that in this timeline, Shran doesn't get his antenna cut off. Not by Johnny, anyway. Next up, because, yeah, I'm still going with this, the 2-parter about the Klingons. As you may recall, they wanted to use augment DNA to juice themselves up, because I guess having double dicks isn't enough. But it didn't really work. In fact, it wasn't an overall plus so much as an overall minus, because an entire generation of Klingons lose their forehead ridges. Fortunately, a Klingon doctor working on the whole thing knew Phlox from a conference and got him kidnapped to help fix it. So, as I said, only one generation was affected, and clearly, this 2-parter was only written to justify the way that Klingons look in TOS. Oh, and Johnny has forehead ridges for a while for reasons. Needless to say, not happening. Enterprise is too busy being at war for no good reason to help the Klingons out, and they might even be on the other side. So, we get all smooth-headed Klingons all the time. Sorry to T'Kuvma, Voq, Worf, Martok, Galron, Alexander, et al. But boy, that's going to be a lot of 5 heads. I swear, it's almost over. But I'd be remiss if I skip the ending. Or at least what the ending should be. Yeah, I know. Get out of here. In Demons and Terra Prime, John Robocop Paxton gets a group of like-minded xenophobes together to try and kick the aliens out of our solar system, while also stealing genetic material from Trip and T'Pol to create a half-Vulcan baby that he can exploit as an abomination. Luckily, Johnny and the Enterprise crew are on the case, and through some reasoned debate, by which I mean some fighting, and then some sabotage, the day is saved, Johnny speechifies, and the show ties into canon as it should. I know what you're thinking. Never happened, right? Nope, it did, and worse. Paxton has way more support after the Vulcans dragged us into a war, so Terra Prime grows exponentially, and with Enterprise off at war, they succeed. The Vulcans cut their losses, probably glad they don't have to handhold us anymore, and we only have like 3 deep spaceships right now anyway. And Enterprise goes home, not to a hero's welcome this time. Spokesman for a vision of the future where Earth realizes that aliens aren't so bad, but not enough people care now. And of course they take T'Pol and Phlox home first. If there had been another season of the show like there should have been, it probably would have focused on Earth and the battle between Terra Prime and people who aren't complete assholes. But that's not the worst thing that could have happened in this timeline. As you may recall, I mentioned how Johnny cemented his OP status by holding the Catcher of Surak, finding his Kir'Shara, and essentially restoring Vulcans to TOS settings. But in this alternate timeline, that doesn't happen. It doesn't matter when the war ends, or at this point even who wins it. The Vulcans will still be condescending dicks whether they win or lose, especially if they win. And with no Kir'Shara to draw on, they may stray even further from the path of logic. And that is the Vulcan that Sarek will grow up on, being born just after the Federation was founded, or roughly 15 years from this point, give or take. And let's be honest with ourselves, Earth is going to maintain this xenophobia for a long time. We're kind of good at it. With Vulcans being the way they are, and every other major race duking it out, there's a good chance that Terra Prime will survive for a long time on Earth. Possibly long enough to influence a young Amanda Grayson, descendant of both Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, as we now know, and Dick Grayson, young ward of Bruce Wayne and Robin to his Batman, as I like to think. So even if the Enterprise crew tries to maintain relations with other races, and Earth actually accepts an ambassador from Vulcan again, I maintain that that person might not be Sarek. And even if it were, I further maintain that condescending Sarek would never appeal to xenophobic Amanda, and Spock might not be born. Now, Spock's life isn't more important than the entire Federation. He said so himself.
The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
But would you want Star Trek in whatever version it's in this skewed timeline without Spock? Any version of it. They're all great. Going down this road probably means a lot of our favorite characters won't be born, but Spock kind of cemented the franchise. He's literally the only character in both pilots. A Star Trek universe without Spock would be like Star Wars without Obi-Wan, I guess? I don't know. I like Star Wars, but I gave up on it after a while. So there it is. The Federation might not exist, the galaxy will be in shambles, and the cornerstone of the franchise is gone, all because one captain decided to listen to his XO. So we actually have to be glad that the Vulcans were like that? Now, why would Rick Berman make a series where we have to be grateful that total dicks are in charge? Oh. Hey everyone. So yeah, finally finished another long-form video. It's been so long since I've done one of these. I hope you guys liked it, and of course if you did, do the usual YouTube stuff. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications if you want, but I'm not sure how soon more videos will be coming. Yeah, I'm not sure where I'm going from here. But don't worry about that. I mean, that's my problem, not yours. Anyway, I've been Scott, and this has been Opinions No One Cares About. Everyone has opinions. This one was mine.